Welcome to our next panel discussion. It's about remote production. Is remote production just another blurry buzzword in our industry? It's not. But it's not simple. Why is it not simple? Especially for us as a system integrator. It's not about a decision between camera A and B or router C and router D. This is easy. This is our usual daily business with OB vans and studios. But remote production tends to involve a lot more stakeholders. So, for instance, in sports, it's the league, it's the right holder, it's the producer, the production company, and us as SI. Therefore, it's a multi-level commitment of all these stakeholders, and it tends to be a very, very long dialogue to get a decision, to get a system up and running. We have here the best ever remote production panel, definitely. And I hand over to our brilliant host, David Davies.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So we're going to look at some of the technical issues surrounding remote production, some of the user case scenarios, and some of the business challenges. And I think, as Rainer has alluded to there, it's the kind of decision-making process, the dialogue that needs to take place, and who also steers the process throughout that are going to be integral to making remote production a success over the next few years, I think. So I'm just going to ask the panelists from left to right to introduce themselves, just to tell us a little bit about their current role, and then we'll get into the discussion.
I'm Geert Thoelen from Belgium, NEP Belgium. I do the technical direction, technical director, and I'm mostly involved in. I started doing IP remote production in 2016, and since then I've been playing around with switches instead of routers.
Yeah, my name is Carsten Higler. I'm from SWR. It's a public station in Germany. I'm head of production, and I did a lot of remote productions in the last nearly 15 years. I was responsible for Soccer World Cup in Brazil and also in Russia and South Africa, so we have a little experience about remote production.
Mm-hmm. I'm Larissa Görner. I'm the Director of Advanced Live Solutions within Grass Valley that spans across our portfolio for cameras, for vision mixers, replay, and everything that's needed for remote. And I work on this topic since 2009, and a lot has changed since that time, so I'm happy to discuss that in more detail.
So I'm Svein Haugen from Nevion. I'm VP of Global Partner Sales. Work a lot as a solution architect, and I've been architecting a few remote production systems over time.
So just a few observations from my perspective. I've done quite a few pieces on remote production over the last year. And I would say that in general, most organizations seem to be wanting to experiment with some degree or some kind of remote production. But they're finding that there are organizational and business challenges, and that they're also requiring quite involved conversations with rights holders, particularly in the area of sport. So a lot of planning, a lot of logistical issues. So anyway, we'll get on to that in a bit. First, though, some basic questions. Why is remote production becoming such a trend now, especially in news? And to which specific aspects of production do you think it's most suited? Carsten.
Well, I think there's one major reason why we use remote production. It's, of course, cost. We have to reduce the staff on site. So this is the reason why we use remote production for, as I said, for Brazil, for the Soccer World Cup. And as well, we did a big remote production in Russia. Most of our crew for TV was in Germany, not in Russia. So that's the most reason, is the cost reason why we use remote production.
Larissa, obviously you said that you've been sort of working really for 10 years now, but it does seem to have become more of a movement in the last couple of years. Why do you think that is?
I think now pressure for producing more content for everyone is really like the major issue, but it's not that there is so much more money around. So actually it's what Carsten said, producing more, but with less. And also workflows now become much more efficient, right? So encoders are better. We can now run over the networks, IP technologies around. So a lot of things which used to be very complicated a couple of years ago are now much easier to do technologically and also make the business case much more valid.
I think I think there are two other things that actually plays a role here. I think the streaming services making more broadcasters try to do more live, because that's where the interest or where they can differentiate themselves lie. Then on the other hand, from a technological point of view, we have much more available bandwidth all of a sudden at a much lower cost. So what was hard to get some years back with 1 gigabit, now you can get 100 gigabit. And that, of course, changes entirely the cost structure of remote production.
That's correct. The costs of connectivity are going down. And I also have to agree with Carsten that you need to have the people on site minimal. But also, for example, like NEP does in Australia, they've got a talent that used to travel 3 or 4 days to do just one show. Now we can do every day 1 or 2 shows. And your engineers, if they're in a remote production facility, they can do 2 or 3 shows in one day, which makes them more efficient and less cost.
So I have some general questions for anyone to come in on. It does seem that sports is driving this trend at the moment. What are the specific reasons for that, do you think? Is it just the sheer number of outlets and platforms to be kept fed with more and more content? Is that the driver?
I think more and more small sports are discovering cheaper ways to produce, and there's always a public for some niche sport or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I think it's in the small sports, the niche sports, the lower leagues, that they want to produce good quality broadcast material at an efficient price.
Carsten, has that been the case with your...
Of course it's the case, but you have to remind that remote production fits not for every production. So and that's the reason I think why sports is a good production. You need like sports venues where you have fixed fiber installation, for example. If we have a lot of productions with every production other than the other, so different venues, different connectivity, etc. So sports is a very good use case where you can use remote production because of that reason.
Yeah. One other thing we see is that the workflow consistency for sports production, so doing football matches, that's something which makes it also a bit easier to make that more scalable and the efficiency higher. So if you have your 6 camera, 7 camera football match every Saturday, every Sunday, then also the savings are much more higher doing that than replicating that with remote.
So looking at the remote production, say you have a football match in a kind of mid-level league, in a mid-level size arena, what are the kind of tasks that are going to be centralised back at Broadcast Centre as a result of remote production? And are there some aspects of the workflow that can't be given that approach?
Right, so the cameras will still be on site, yeah. Right? So that's the general thing that's always there. And that is also something where we are really focusing on within Grass Valley, enabling to just have the camera heads, but all of the rest, all the processing, having that as a central site, or, looking into more future data center architectures to be able to have this. Of course, there is audio as well, so there need to be microphones there as well. And for that, you need to have transport equipment to actually bring that then to your home. So this is what I think will be on site for a very long time. But what we also see right now is a lot of directors, they say like, well, it's all wonderful, do your remote production, but I'm going to sit on site. So find a solution for doing that. So it's also enabling that flexibility for the creative crew, to being on site, to have probably replay on site and to enable also this flexibility in the workflows.
Yeah. And there is one thing that goes in parallel with the development and the evolution of remote production, which is what is happening in the facilities with the new standards of 70, 21, 10, etc., which actually also makes it much easier to bring back a CCU or to remove a CCU entirely, and try to look at how can you bring that camera feed not only back to one location but to multiple locations. So you can have backups on the production, because one thing that is always a challenge when developing a business case for a remote production is taking into account the risk aspect.
Yeah.
What if you are not only losing your connectivity there, but what if some of the equipment is going down? How do you actually go around it if you are not on site?
But one more thing besides sports, we do since more than 15 years, as I mentioned, a weekly news, a weekly talk show. This is since 15 years, so it works properly and it's very good.
So
besides sports.
what are the specifics? I mean, you mentioned this talk show in our conversation earlier. What are the specifics of that production? I mean, what is it demanding in terms of number of speakers and audience? I mean, can you just give us a little bit of a background on it?
For the talk show, it's a talk show with the 5 guests, and with the 100 people sitting there, with 5, 6 cameras. All the microphone stuff, etc., and all the production crew is not on site. The production crew is in a data center and in the production area in the headquarter. It's only 3 kilometers away, so it's not a problem. Also, the problem with directors talking to the guests, etc., this is no problem if you close together. It's other thing if you have larger distances, but in that case it works very well. So since more than 15 years.
And did you find, obviously you've mentioned that you have done remote production in Brazil and other large-scale sporting events. Have the lessons that you've learned from that talk show been applicable to some of the sports events?
There's a lot we learned. The most important thing is not the technical part. You can, if you have the bandwidth, if you have the technology, it's not simple, but it works. The most important thing is that you have your director, your editorial stuff, your anchor, etc., that they used to be, that the director is not nearby, so that the communication is different. So that's the most important part that we learned, and that is going on, I think.
Yeah.
And if you look at sports production, one thing that's a bit interesting there also to keep in mind, I mean, we often talk about football, or ice hockey, as Broadcast Solutions did in Finland, which is in a way quite simple to do from a workflow point of view, because you know when the game is going to happen and you know that they are just going to play. But if you take, since I'm from Norway, ski jumping, it's going to be mist and fog in the arena, and actually the director need to talk to the people running the show, the actual race, and there need to be that collaboration. So the technology also need to have a mapping for that, so it fits into that workflow. So the workflow is basically an essential part of the whole thing, and not the technology itself, of course.
And obviously the whole transportation aspect is absolutely pivotal. Can you give us a little bit of an update of your own sort of developments in that area over the last couple of years, and how you're looking to support people, looking to build flexible, variable remote production scenarios?
Yeah, so, well, first of all, I think that we don't focus on the classical remote production only as such. The way we see it, and what we do for a lot of customers, is they're actually building their IP facilities as remote production facilities. So, and they come and say, well, we want the remote production to be the standard. That's a normal one. It's a special case when you're actually having next door production with everybody close together. And then we try to use the same kind of mechanisms for both. The latest of technology that has arisen is, of course, the JPXS, which brings the latency quite a lot down. It fits very well into the essence flows of 2110, so that sort of goes hand in hand, and also becomes essential if you are going 4K on remote productions. So we have had quite a bit of success in deploying that in several locations. And then, of course, it's also trying to see that you might have NEP producing, but you might not be the end customer, and what you want to hand out to someone is on IP. And there need to be a gateway between those two layers, even though the signal is the same at both ends. So all these transport mechanisms in the IP domain is also very critical for it to be seamless. So,
from both sort of Grass Valley and Nevion perspectives, are you finding that the number of inquiries about technologies that will support remote production is increasing dramatically at the moment?
I think it's now really the time. You know, it took a while, right, to really take off also for getting that understanding in the industry to really use it. And that has a lot to do with more the workflow and the people than the technology. I think technology has been around for a while. And it is currently definitely our focus to enable a variety of workflows, because it's different ones, right? Some want a centralized remote production, so they're bringing everything home. Some want to have the flexibility, so they can, still have some of the operations, camera control or replay on a central part, but then want to have possibly, switching and audio engineering on site or monitoring and so on. So to enable these workflows, but also enable like a workflow consistency. So for us, that is that's actually the work we are focused on most with all the solutions.
Yeah, so workflows are for us very important. The other thing that's very important is to give the users the ability to choose equipment and choose between different equipment and change, so that you get the sort of a seamless change. And of course, the standards are essential to make that happen. And that, of course, it's very nice for a company to sit and have the whole market share for some products. But I think the best way to drive the innovation forward is actually to have that competition, that you actually are competing on the technology and on the quality of the things, and that you can interchange stuff. So that is a major part that we are looking at, both from cameras, vision mixers, but also on the switch vendor side. So that's also important to be vendor agnostic for everything. Yeah.
In terms of NEP, I mean, what implications is remote production having for the way that you plan, both the way that you cater to specific events on an ongoing basis, and also plan your inventory? Because presumably it has, in terms of facilities and equipment, it has big implications.
Yeah. We are trying to work more on a data center base type, so all the equipment that you need is in a data center, and then we've the camera heads and lenses and everything that needs to be on site with a minimal crew. So for each camera, a cameraman and one guy to support audio, one guy to support the connection and the video. That's all you need on site, and then you only have traveling costs for one truck or a smaller truck instead of two big trucks, an OB van and a truck.
As Ryan has mentioned, obviously one of the big challenges around remote production is having those conversations with rights owners, for example, rights holders, about how remote production can be applied to their events. Carsten, can you give us a bit of a flavour of the kind of dialogues that you've had, for example, with sports federations or sports associations about how best to apply remote production, and how the decision-making process should be led and implemented?
Yeah, as I mentioned, we did major sport events like soccer, and those productions 2014 and 2018 we did remote. As right holders, as I mentioned, we have less crew on site, so this is a very important thing for us. But not every production or kind of production is suitable for remote production. We have a lot of productions who changes in between the productions. So remote production is not the dad of OB events, of course. We still have a lot of productions who we need an OB truck. We more try to use more flexible technique, and remote production is one kind of be flexible for do productions. So on the rights holder side for the big sports events, yes, we'll do it, we'll use it, but not for everything it's suitable.
I mean, when you're talking to federations, particularly at this point in the process, is there a nervousness about, not necessarily sending in fleets of large trucks, doing
yes,
something that's a bit more scaled down? Do they have concerns about that?
Yes, of course. Of course, I'm responsible for the OB side, OB broadcast department. Of course, there's a big question: do we need OB trucks? Do we do everything with remote? No, we will not. But we have to think about it. Also in the future, if we think about 2 or 3 years further on, 5G networks, if we have a better bandwidth, if we have more flexibility in the network, on the network side, there will be coming more flexibility, and there are more opinions to produce without OB events. So yes, there will be a challenge also to have still OB events, to do productions with OB events, but it's going further on. So yes, it's challenging at the moment.
Your OB events are going to change the face. You're not going to carry around all your technical equipment.
That's it.
They can be only desks with screens, actually.
That's it.
Yeah.
Obviously, there are huge implications personnel-wise here, and particularly if you're going to be sending streamlined teams out with maybe just a couple of engineers, they are going to have to be really on top of their case, and they're going to have to be multi-skilling perhaps more than they would have done in the past. Do you think is that a fair observation?
I think that's mandatory in the nowadays business, that the engineers are not only doing video or audio or network, they tend to be more all-round engineers. It's necessary.
And how do you, as a service provider, ensure that your engineers all have those range of skills?
Train them. Train them.
I know, but does it require more coordinated training programs and so on? Yeah.
You need to constantly train them, see where they are. Also empower them to do so, because you've got some guys, they say, I've been doing this for 20 years, now I suddenly need to change my skills. Why? And then empower them, help them with it, and then usually they, now I understand why we used to do it this way. And they tend to be better engineers afterwards.
Right. Okay.
To see the more global picture.
Have you noticed? Is that your observation from an SWR perspective?
Yeah, you have to have more multiple skill crew. A few years ago, we for our crew we had one IT guy, not a broadcast engineer, not an audio, not a video engineer, an IT engineer. No idea what broadcast means, but he has an idea what IT means, and that's a major effect if you want to do remote production. IP-based, you need the specialists. It's very hard to train a sound engineer in this IT technology. And you have to be multiple and flexible, of course, yeah.
You're not going to train them as D&T IP engineer, but we learn them how to handle with IP addresses. We learn them what it is, so they don't see it as, I don't want to touch this, but they at least try, while hanging on the phone with a real IT engineer, try to solve things. That's what you need to learn them. And IT guys, they tend not to understand what going on black is, because, the switch is out, switch is out, we wait for 10 minutes. Well, you can't do that in a broadcast environment. And that's what our broadcast engineers all know. That's holy, never go black. And that's working with the two different kind of worlds, mixing together now is brilliant.
I'm talking of specific solutions geared towards remote production. There's certainly on the audio side, I can think of a number of examples of companies who've brought solutions branded as being remote production to market. Do you think we'll see more of that over the next couple of years? Do you think we'll see more of that, more of those sort of solutions that specifically branded as being remote production technology?
Yes and no. I think the whole IP workflow and abilities for the products will help you already a lot, right? And then what is to solve is still the networking issue, and I still believe it is an issue because it can be very terminating for a lot of cases. So although you have in the Nordics, for example, you have backbones, with 100 gig, it's not going to cost, it's like $1,000 per month. Then you're going here, you want to do a production for 3 days, and they're going to charge you 10,000 for these 3 days, right? So it is so volatile still, so for the dedication, I think that where it needs to be really remote production focuses, like as you said before, enabling the open interfaces, like making the different equipment talking with each other, so that we get we get all these benefits with it, like having all signals coming in. You have all these advantages once you do remote. You send all your cameras back home, so a lot of people can work on the content, not only those that are on site. But these are normal that's normal production equipment, but that is just enabled now to also serve for that special need, but that can also serve for a just simple studio setup or, others. So also that all the engineers working with that are, feeling really relaxed, either that's in their studio, it's on site, it's, it's a distributed production or whatever. So I think that to streamline there is most important.
I think that there will be some products that are focused towards remote production, as there has been now. I think the main reason is marketing more than anything. But today, a lot of the remote production is point-to-point connectivity, and that's how everybody's thinking about it. And then there is not that much complexity in it. You need to compress the signals, and then you need to give it out as IP, and then some service provider takes over from there. But when you start to talk to customers that are renting larger networks and then building out multi-facilities on those, like NEP has been doing, etc., then you get a different kind of platforms that you need to handle those kind of signals. And I wouldn't call that actually remote production, but
this has to be. I think this has to be the goal, because we tried 2 years ago a test with remote production for third league soccer. Over IP and also over IP network, complete network infrastructure in our headquarter, and you are very flexible because we have 3 stations: Baden, Mainz, Stuttgart, and you are very flexible if you are in the whole IP infrastructure with remote production. This has to be the goal, to use all the IP infrastructure.
Yeah, but it's mainly the equipment needs to be. How do you say it? Flexible. For example, we started in 2016 remote producing over a 1 gigabit internet line, and the line was not a line for us, a private line. It was a line where the banking, cash flow, and everything was done on the same line. So it was very important for us not to overflood that line. And the other day you have a 100 gig line, and you need to be able to use the same equipment. You don't want to, now I have to buy a new box to do this because I need compression. Yeah. No, you want this equipment to do and compression and raw and something in between. And that's actually the most important thing in the equipment right now that we need to look at.
This is coming more and more from technological point of view. We have focused on it quite some time to make software-based products so that you actually can change and adopt those needs. So I think that's becoming more and more the standard out there as well.
Equipment needs to have decent processing and microservices where you can, I need this today, this, and this, and then you can build a block, because the most important thing we need to do is every time define what is this remote production, what is the threat here. Is it the connectivity, which is 90% of the case the threat, or is it something else? And then you need to be able to build with your little microservices the perfect solution.
Yeah. Now, we've obviously talked about the cost benefits and the flexibility benefits, but there's another big advantage, isn't there, and that surrounds the issue of sustainability. So do you think that remote production is going to become an important part of broadcasters in the future, moving more towards carbon neutrality? Larissa?
Yeah, so I think that's a discussion, especially in Europe, which is currently happening. So that's, we hear a lot coming that I think the BBC did a major part. So they make, for different productions now, they make their calculations on their carbon footprint. And for that, they actually decide if they're going to go remote or not. So which is a totally different thing than, of course, costs, but then for public broadcaster, for the BBC, this became as important as the cost now, which I think, is something that all of us are thinking about right now, right? So what can we do? And, I think for going on a large event, which is happening, and you're sending all these crew over there, 5,000 people, which work there in production, plus all of that. I just think, we sometimes need to probably think about, do we need to do it that way still, or do we have probably a technological solution to make that better? Yeah, and to also look at the footprint that we're having and going to that football match, 3 times a week, and you do always the same thing, or could you probably centralize that? We're doing that in a lot of things, but maybe, in broadcasts we need to look at that deeper. And I think the BBC at the moment, they are really leading this together with BT, looking at what impact that also has on our environment.
And particularly in the case of public broadcasters, you could imagine that actually working in that way might be made a condition of their public subsidy in the end. They not only have to be seen to be doing it, there's some kind of regulatory impetus as well.
Right.
Yeah.
In the US, that is, by the way, not really a discussion today. But here in Europe, we do have that.
Yeah. It's a matter of time, I'm sure.
But luckily, I think also that it follows the cost aspect.
Yeah.
In a sense,
Exactly.
it's expensive to send stuff, so
Yes.
it makes sense to actually make it green.
Yeah.
So sort of asking you for your closing comments then. Obviously next year it's a big sporting year in particular, and a big multi-sporting event, the name of which escapes me temporarily. But I'm sure that we'll see a lot of remote production there. Do you think that it's around these kind of large flagship type events that we're going to see the most rapid growth of remote production?
Olympic Games have always been
I wasn't going to mention it.
have always been a catalysator to implement new technologies. So I guess we can expect some things, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes and no. Of course, Olympics or World Cup soccer is a catalysator, but of course you have to have a good production. It has to be a safe production, cost efficiency production, and altogether all these aspects. Yes, there will be remote, but there also will be a classic part of production. Let me say it that way.
Larissa, how do you see things developing over the next couple of years?
Yeah. Sorry?
How do you see things developing over the next couple
I mean, I think, it will get more, but there will always be, it always needs to be a business case for that. It's not like that we say, oh, it's all going to go remote. I'm sure that's not going to happen, because there will always be, that on-site, you need to have that kind of James Bond guys, that's going to save your productions, that you can't do remote. Yeah, and that's going to be particular. I think we won't do a Super Bowl and a Eurovision Song Contest remote. But then there are like smaller things. There are coming new things, Tier 3, that we don't even think about today, right? Under water rugby, whatever, that are not produced, but will be produced in the future. And these are the top cases for really going remote. So I think we will see a lot, but not only remote, but also like distributed, going IP, all in this. So I see a smooth, a smooth acceleration.
I think distributed is the right word. We did the transportation for World Championship in League of Legends for Riot Games, and then you have people all over the place. So it's truly distributed, and that's of course a full remote production. And I think also we are investing quite a lot of time in 5G to bring that forward. We have a EU project running with that, and that I think also will change things quite a lot in the future. It's
going to be another important part of this.
It's going to be an important part to get the bandwidth you need everywhere, basically.
Yeah. Got a few minutes for questions from the audience. Does anyone have a question for our panel? No? Okay, doesn't look like it. All right, well, thanks very much. If you can join me in thanking our panel.
Thank you.